Hello, and thanks for joining us. I'm Angela Davis. You are listening to a special North Star Journey live conversation done in partnership with Sahan Journal that will address the current state of immigration in Minnesota. We're recording this live at El Colegio High School in Minneapolis with a panel of legal experts, advocates, and a crowd of community members here with us. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Hi. I also have a co-moderator for this discussion. Hibah Ansari is here. Hibah is the immigration reporter at Sahan Journal. Hi, Hibah.
Hello.
Hello. So tell us, to get us started, why does Sahan, we want to talk about this. Why does Sahan Journal choose this topic for our discussion?
Yeah, thanks, Angela. So as you know, Sahan Journal is dedicated to covering immigrants and communities of color in Minnesota. And with immigration at the southern border at record highs, we had been hearing from a lot of Latino families and also other immigrant families in general who are concerned about changes to immigration, especially with the 2024 election right around the corner.
So yes, we have a lot to cover in this conversation, so let me get to it. Let me introduce our panel of experts. We have with us this evening, first, we have Emilia Gonzalez, the Executive Director for Unidas Minnesota, a local advocacy group for Latinos across the state of Minnesota. Thank you for being here, Emilia.
Thank you so much for having me.
And next to her, we have John Bruning, a supervising litigation attorney at the Advocates for Human Rights. Now, that is a non-governmental organization that works to represent immigrant victims of human rights abuses in the U.S. and around the world. Welcome, John.
Thank you for having me.
Next to John, we have the legal director of the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, Jenny Stoll-Powell. The Law Center provides legal representation to low-income clients. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And there on the end, we have Nazra Ismail. Nazra is the U.S. Enterprise Executive Director of Alight, which is a refugee resettlement agency. Nice to meet you, Nazra. Welcome to Minnesota.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here.
Hi, she just moved here recently. So Hibah is also an expert on this topic because she covers immigration full-time as part of her reporting job at Sahan Journal. So for people like me, those of you who are like me, who might be coming to the conversation feeling a little bit overwhelmed because it's a struggle to keep up with all the news headlines, let's start by sort of setting the stage. So, John, I'm going to ask you to help us with this. What is going on at the southern border of the United States right now? There's a lot of noise about the situation. And so can you sort of give us a sense of what we're seeing right now?
Sure. So right now at the southern border, we're seeing, I think, unprecedented numbers of people that are fleeing their home countries and trying to seek safety here in the United States. This has been exacerbated by climate change, by conflicts throughout the world, really. We're seeing people from every corner of the globe. And it's also being, I think we're also kind of seeing like the cooling effects of COVID-19 and Title 42 and other policies that prevented people from coming to the United States before. And so now we're seeing just really unprecedented numbers there, and a lot of people coming to Minnesota as well in numbers that we really just haven't seen before.
The Washington Post likened the situation to a kitchen with broken pipes. And the images that we see in the news, it's disturbing and it seems confusing.
Yeah, and I think the million-dollar question is what to do about this, but there's so many different things that are happening and so much misinformation about what is happening there. But I think the reality is that there's a really precarious situation there. A lot of people that are trying to find safety, there is no safety at the border. People are vulnerable and victimized by many different people that are trying to exploit them. And they're trying to get into the United States, but there isn't a good way to get in. And government officials, nonprofits, everybody else are really overwhelmed by these numbers and unable to help things move along.
Are the majority of the people, the immigrants at the southern border today, presenting themselves to Border Patrol and seeking asylum?
I don't have a specific number, but I think it's nearly everybody. Certainly there's some people that are coming for other reasons, economic reasons, but almost everybody is coming and trying to request asylum here in the United States.
And if so, if they're doing that, what exactly does that mean in terms of the circumstances that they're leaving behind?
Yeah, I mean, I think a fairly famous poem, "No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark." And that's really the situation that we're seeing. People that are coming from West Africa, Anglophone Cameroonians who are facing significant repression, people from Southeast Asia who are facing, in some cases, genocide, as well as other parts of Central, Eastern Africa, Central America, and South America. We're seeing just gang violence on a scale that we just have never seen before. People in Eastern Europe facing instability and war. It's really just, there's crisis all around the globe, and it's all coming to the southern border, in terms of what people are fleeing.
And we know, too, that some of these immigrants are making their way to Minnesota, even though we're far from the southern border. Where are the majority of people coming to Minnesota coming from? Do you know?
Pretty significant numbers coming to Ecuador. A lot of it, in terms of who comes to Minnesota or who goes anywhere else in the country, is very regionalized. So we're not getting just a microcosm of who's at the border. We're seeing particular groups that have some presence here already. So Ecuador has been very prominent. We're seeing, again, people from Cameroon, from Russia, Ukraine, other parts of Eastern Europe, various countries throughout Central and South America. Again, so it is really all over, but I would say Ecuadorians have been like the most prominent group in terms of who is needing legal assistance or other social services.
Nazra, can you fill us in on some of the reasons? So when folks are coming to Minnesota from the southern border, or really from anywhere, what are the reasons? Is it political? Is it safety? Is it economic reasons? How would you describe it?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think the reasons are many. I work with Alight. We're a global and local organization, and so we tend to hear, some of the prevailing situations, which is often almost always conflict. Some kind of conflict could be worsened by political instability and/or climate, and sometimes it's all three. And so I think the reasons are so many, which is why it's not just a border issue here for us, it's actually around the world. Some of the data we keep seeing, and it's unfortunately heading in the wrong direction, it is increasing, is we are seeing upwards of 130 million people who are displaced. And so I can imagine our border is one that we are feeling close to and we care about, but there's so many nations around the world who are seeing people flee. And I just want to underscore, these are not tourism reasons. I mean, these are vulnerable communities, much like my family when we came to America when I was very young, who were seeking safety, who were seeking shelter, who were seeking some of the basic things that we all are so lucky to have. And so it is a lot of pressure that we share with the world.
Hibah, I see you nodding. I'm sure much of what we've heard already, none of this surprises you.
No, but it's still really important information, especially to set the context in terms of what that means at a local level. And so I really want to kind of take the conversation from the southern border to Minnesota. So, John, can you tell me a little bit about, your work as an attorney in this field, advocating for non-citizens in immigration court? What are you seeing, especially in terms of caseload?
Yeah, I think the short answer is everybody is really overwhelmed right now. We've seen, I think Minnesota is in many ways microcosmic of what's happening nationally in terms of numbers. Immigration court nationally and here in Minnesota, the case backlogs have doubled over the last year and a half or 2 years. The number of immigration attorneys and capacity of local legal service providers has not doubled over that period of time. It's stayed about the same. So we've seen the representation rate in immigration court actually cut in half over this period of time. We're also really overwhelmed with just calls for assistance. We went from under 1,000 to maybe a little bit over 1,000 calls for assistance in previous years, and now we're on track to receive over 12,000 requests for assistance really in a very short period of time. And I think, as other panelists here can attest, I think that's a pretty universal experience right now. That means that people can't get help. People are calling many different organizations, and that's just kind of adding to that burden. It means also that there's the wait time to get an asylum hearing, to be able to get permanent safety, is being pushed out even further and even further. I think it's just, everyone is kind of feeling the numbers, and we want to try to rise to the occasion, but it's also causing us to have to rethink how we provide these services and what services we can provide.
Jenny, feel free to chime in. Is the Immigrant Law Center experiencing similar repercussions?
We're also seeing that increase in demand for services, and because a lot of people are seeking asylum, we're referring them to the advocates for human rights, and so people are going from agency to agency seeking help. I think at the same time, we have other case types, and some of those are also putting strains on capacity. For example, we represent victims of crime, and because of the limit on the number of visas available each year and more people seeking these visas, the wait times are getting in longer and longer, so our cases stay open longer. So, when there's such a demand, but yet when a case now takes 8 to 10 years, and that time is just going to keep increasing, it really does compound that capacity question and makes it even more difficult to provide those services.
So, Amelia, how does then all of that play out, specifically for the Latino community here in Minnesota?
So, as we heard, we have an increased amount of neighbors that are seeking asylum from places like Venezuela and Ecuador, and we are seeing that the social services that are available and that can be accessed regardless of immigration status are experiencing high volumes and wait lists for basic necessities like housing, food, and shelter. And we are also, this is something that it was predictable, and it also was we could have a solution. This is the result of inaction, a very slow rollout to slow down climate change, and inaction and immigration reform since 1989. We don't have also a solution for DACA, and we still have a border bill that was moved in Congress that was extremist and was catering to anti-immigrant Congress people, and still was not extremist enough and was rejected by the Republican Party. So all these different foreign and economic policy, climate change, instability, the rising of authoritarian governments in the world are forcing people to migrate to places that have water, have resources, and that are perceived in the public perspective that they are safe and welcoming. Let's remind also ourselves that this is, so in the municipal sense, this is a crisis created by anti-immigrant governors that are trying to punish cities that are doing the right thing to support these new arrivals and refugees by recruiting and sending people to places that they might not have relationships, that might not know where they are in the map, but for sure there is a finance operation to move people from the safe havens that they arrive to, trying to find other relatives or a community, and bringing them into places like Minnesota, New York, Chicago. So it was preventable, and we have a problem, but still we have a shared responsibility to not polarize human beings as a crisis that we cannot mitigate. We have a responsibility because we still live in a state where we have enough. We have enough, and we can share.
So I think one of my favorite parts of my job is, learning about all of this really systemic contextual information, but then finding the personal stories in it. So I wanted to start with Amelia, but I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to chime in. Amelia, do you know somebody whose case maybe has been stalled or who's fallen through the cracks in some other way through the system that we're talking about?
I know a lot of people that are new arrivals and who are right now in wait lists trying to find legal counsel as they have been released from a detention facility at the border. We know women and children from all ages that are joining some of the social services to be able to find the pertinent support when they have their court hearings. Personally, my father is undocumented. And he's been waiting for an immigration remedy since 2001. So these are
23 years since 2001.
23 years, yes. And he has been in Minnesota since 1992. So there is older immigrants who have already provided their strength and their labor to build stronger communities and who are now deemed as disposable. Human beings that once we exploited, they are relinquished to the corners of society where there is no social services, no retirement, no health care. And we are also in this moment where we have newer immigrants who are being polarized in this rhetoric of divide and conquer. Who deserves an immigration remedy? The ones that have been here before or the ones that just arrived? And what Unidos, the organization that is accountable to mixed status families, we say it's not a matter of deserving, it's a matter of humane immigration policy that meets people in the moment and the crisis that has not been mitigated for the last 30 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
So to the rest of you, John, Jenny, and Nasra, I'll let you all kind of chime in. Like, what are some of the stories of people you know who are stuck in this system, and what do those obstacles look like for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think without getting into individual client cases, I mean, the advocates have hundreds of clients that are stuck in backlogs. We have people that came here on visas and applied for asylum, kind of quote unquote the right way, who applied in 2014, 2015, and have yet to get an interview at the asylum office to have their story heard. And they will get asylum eventually one day when they finally get an interview. And kind of the same thing in immigration court cases that have been pending for over 10 years now. That means that families are separated. Once they get asylum, they can petition to bring some family members here, but they can't do that while their case is still pending. And it means years of uncertainty in their cases. It means years of having to renew their work permits on a 2-year basis. Thankfully, that's been extended to 5 years now, but for a long time it was every 2 years, and then it takes 18 months for it to be approved every time. It's no way for people to live. And so it's been very difficult for them. Many people have medical issues that have come up. People are stressed out and anxious, and it's really difficult for them to keep going. Kids age out of their parents' cases and then lose protections. I think the hardest thing too is, they have to just kind of keep at it. Our volunteer attorneys and our staff attorneys have to stay in touch with them for this long period of time. Or when we change attorneys, the new attorney has to step in, and then they have to build that trust up again with them to tell their story and do this over and over and over again. So it's really just an unsustainable practice. And now we're kind of getting to the point where to even get an asylum interview, again, for people that came with visas, we have to sue the government in every single case to get an interview. And it's $400 to do that. Applying for asylum is free. You have to pay $400 just in filing fees to file that complaint in federal court, and that's going to start eating up federal court resources as well and U.S. attorneys' resources to get to that point. And it's tens of thousands of people in this situation, hundreds of thousands of people in this situation all around the country that are stuck in these backlogs.
Yeah. And maybe I can add to that and say, when we look back, I know as a Light, we serve a particular community who come from, primarily when we talk about the U.S., so we've served the Ukrainian community who have come from Ukraine at the height of that conflict, and then more recently, the Afghani community as well. They come through different pathways, refugee resettlement, sponsorship, but then also there's an important point, at least for those of you who might be following this, but this is an interplay between policy, responsiveness in terms of services at local, national, federal level, and then it's also the quality of responsiveness and what the system of ours that's been very active, that's been very, America is not new to receiving refugees. This has been part and parcel of who we are. The drastic change, I think, in sometimes that come about in policies that cause some of these backlogs, that cause just an aggravation around the systems is, we used to welcome around 120,000 refugees a year into the U.S. But once some of our policies did change in 2016, 2017, all of a sudden it became an infrastructure problem. It became, we were set up to receive a certain kind of level and absorb and support, and there's many benefits to why people come. And after they seek shelter and their basic services are supported, they become incredible agents of change, incredible entrepreneurial change to growing states, growing the U.S. economy, being absolutely part and parcel of our strength and our diversity. So I think one of the things is some of what we're feeling is because of drastic policy changes where us as a light, who are not neutral, humanitarian organizations, we can sense the pressure on all. And then on top of that, post-pandemic, or if we can even say that, then there's competing and absolutely credible issues at home. So there's a balance in the priorities. And so I think our systems are taking so much burden, and at the same time, the humanity of people who are just looking for shelter, just looking for safety, just looking to start life because something disrupted their own life. They can wait years to come through. They can wait years for basic benefits. And then some of the other stories we see, at least with the communities that I've worked with here in Minnesota, is there are programs like the private sponsorship program here that's been implemented together with other resettlement organizations, other private sponsorship organizations, where everyday Minnesotans say, yes, we're going to support these communities. Yes, you may not have the state's support or the city's support, or it might be lagging, but I will take and help you take your kids to school. I will help you get your ID. I will make sure that while you learn English, I can babysit for your children. So there's this welcoming capacity despite the issues. That is probably some of the most beautiful stories that we hear that says, keep hope alive. It is difficult. We're not alone, and we'll get better.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to add on a really basic level some of the challenges. People coming in through the border who are in removal and have ICE check-ins, they're given a whole stack of papers. Some of the information is very confusing. And on January 2nd, I showed up at my office and I found a young man and woman in the lobby speaking Spanish. And I said, ¿les puedo ayudar? Can I help you? And they were looking for their place to check in with ICE, thinking it was at our office, which happens because we're on a pro bono list that helps with court cases. And I asked to look at their papers, and even for me as an attorney, some of the papers are very confusing because they're giving information about different programs and even programs that don't apply to their particular situation. And I looked at the young man and I said, you know what? You don't have to worry for another month. Your appointment's actually on February 2nd or February 1st. Because the days, he thought January 2nd was the day of his check-in when it was really February 1st. And can you imagine, trying to figure out and make your way through this very complicated system with very little assistance and representation available?
Absolutely.
Just having people explain what these papers say and make sure people know where to go and what to bring is important as well.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you probably breathed a sigh of relief after hearing that. Or what was that conversation like with him?
I think, yes, they were relieved that they knew where to go in the future for their check-in dates, knowing it wasn't at our office building.
And then they had another month to do it as well. Yeah.
I think maybe if I can add one more thing about, bureaucracy is something, I'll tell you maybe just a personal story. If you're on the other side of bureaucracy, but it's not your own, and there's a language barrier, which tends to be, one of the main reasons of that people do grapple with even getting through a particular process. For some of us, I grew up in Somalia. I was very young when I came. My family was sponsored by an American family in San Francisco. I'm so glad we never filled out some of these paperwork because we just couldn't even do it right. And for some of the forms that you can find in anyone who's ever worked for government, one mistake and, you're looking to come back and make an appointment. I want to point out those of you who probably love to go to get your license renewed. You know what that's like. Right around your birthday, you're not looking forward to filling out those forms. So these are just things that we're used to, but imagine if you're afraid for your life and you I don't know where
You just arrived.
You just arrived.
And you're in Minnesota, you know.
And the cold is probably not your favorite, but you know, it's just imagine of some of these things, we have to humanize them. I mean, at Alight, we co-create with our communities, and we try and come up with the solutions, but it's how we do it that really matters, and it's making sure that everyday Americans step up and do our part, but our systems are really a lot under pressure, and I have to say, there's also just growing mis and disinformation. I don't mind a great debate. I don't mind some friendly, critical feedback, but I think the stories are really important because they show us a shared vision and a shared humanity, and that's with Alight where we try to walk along with our customers.
So, Amelia, can you tell us more about, what the most current and pressing needs are for the immigrant communities that you work with and represent?
So Unidos Minnesota is accountable to new Americans. We are expanding into a multiracial operation, but we continue to be heavily represented by undocumented Latinos, but also refugees and new Americans from other communities. And as we build our agenda during the last legislative session, and the number one priority was driver's licenses and healthcare. So successfully, we deliver that with all of you and all the support we got. So folks will be able to, folks are lining up and getting their driver's license. So that's great. And folks will be able to enroll into, if you qualify due to economic, you need to meet economic criteria to enroll on Minnesota in Minnesota Care starting January 1st of 2025. So we also know that according to the report published during the fall from the Minnesota Business Partnership, there is a worker shortage of 168,000 workers that the state needs to be able to have these jobs filled and operational and in full function because we are seeing a lot of the baby booming generation retiring in like very big percentages in the state of Minnesota. And we think that this is a challenge that represents an incredible opportunity to provide technical support, assistance, and training for these new Americans who have or don't have immigration status to fulfill some of those jobs. So this is why we are building this year what we call the Rise Up Center, which is an opportunity center where we're going to train folks into apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs for the union careers that are well paid, have benefits, and are really important in order to transition and decarbonize our cities and our municipalities. So we are seeing immigrants as part of the solution of climate change, and we're building that infrastructure to be not just have opinions, but actually roll up our sleeves and operationalize complicated policy into really humane and common sense solutions where we don't have to pit people against each other. We're actually working together to find solutions to complex problems. Other things that we're seeing is folks want access to work authorization. We are rolling out this. We piloted the first defer action for workers that have an investigation open with an agency, for example, the Department of Labor and Industry or the Attorney General's. If any immigrant worker, either through a temporary visa or undocumented worker, can prove and open an investigation with one of these agencies that they are for sure a victim of unfair labor practices, we can, these agencies can publish a letter in which we can then work with our partners, the attorneys, and they can get deferred action and a work permit while that investigation is ongoing. So folks are able to get jobs and perhaps go back to school or get in training, open bank accounts, just have a different type of opportunity. So we see a conversation about the green economy as a very high demand of our base, of our members, because folks want to work and they want to have good jobs and they want to have good benefits. And I think that is what every Minnesotan wants today and has always wanted. and there is a shortage, and we can be part of the solution for that.
Absolutely.
I have a question. A word that has come up quite a bit in the conversation so far is undocumented. And I would like one of you to define that to me. What is exactly is an undocumented worker or undocumented person?
So an undocumented person is a human being that does not have immigration authorization to stay in the U.S. They could have crossed the border or never had authorization, or they could have their authorization expire through different scenarios, different contexts. And with that expiration, then they just started living without an authorization to live or work in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important to add, too, that undocumented doesn't really have a set definition, right? Like, it's kind of used as a fill-in to describe like a really complicated set of legal situations. But I think undocumented and some of the more pejorative terms that are used for migrants that have come here, it really doesn't capture the fact that many of them have documents, right? When they come meet with us, they have documents. They have documents from Homeland Security and ICE that recognizes who they are, that presents their that confirms their identity. Sometimes it gives them permission to stay in the United States for a certain period of time, allows them to apply for asylum, go through an immigration court process, receive work authorization, and some other things like that. They don't have a set permanent status here, but most people that are considered undocumented, the government knows who they are, right? They have some form of papers. They just don't have a green card or some other, a visa to stay here. And so I think I think it's really complicated to kind of use that terminology because it doesn't actually convey what's really happening.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I think on the flip side of that, you also have then the refugee resettlement process, which is a very different pathway. And Nasra Alight, I know, works to help refugees resettle in the U.S. Can you tell us a little bit more? I know you mentioned it before, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what the resettlement process looks like right now.
Yeah, I think like all the other processes that have been affected by different policies, it's also experiencing some efficiency issues. And there's a lot of backlog, and there's a lot of our systems that are trying to catch up. I know some of the data I was reading today, the numbers recently of those who are refugees and who come through that pathway are last few years maybe around 1,500. Looking to maybe increase that number and see that it could creep into 2,000, a little bit over 2,000. And so those numbers are going up, but there is a process in play, and it's very much under a lot of bureaucracy, but the right kind of bureaucracy, so people can come safely and legally. The conditions of displacement don't always allow themselves for people to come through. So I just want to honor the word that you said, which is humans are experiencing displacements, and sometimes there's a particular pathway that's legal and suitable. It just takes time, but there are pathways. Others, it's life and fear and conditions that really determine paper and documentation and processes not catching up with the reality of, for instance, a young mom fleeing with her young daughter, which is not necessarily something I would want to be in, to be quite honest. And I could also understand where they might find themselves in a different kind of asylum. So there are different pathways with different pros and cons, but I know for us as Alight, we've been working with those who come through humanitarian parole and come through private sponsorship. I was just reading another data today about Poland, in response to the Ukrainian crisis, is now reporting that they've taken in somewhere between 1.5 to 1.7 million Ukrainians. So the responses, I think, and the systems and the capacity of those vary. And they're dynamic depending on how well a country is doing. Amelia, you also said, once people get integrated, once you get through the emergency part, which is some of our refugee clients, customers, that's what we call them, once they get their basic services like every American, it's bills, rent, children, finances, those kinds of issues then come into it. And what you see is, at least some of the data I've read, 15% of refugees who come into the U.S., and this data is a bit old, but in the last 10 years, 15% of them have either become or are considered entrepreneurs. And the data indicates that they can add somewhere between $3.5 to $4 billion into our economy. So there's just there's all kinds of angles about why we have these resettlement refugee processes and why some of the systems are having a hard time. But different cities have different experiences as well. And we've been really proud to welcome our new Americans from Afghanistan as well as Ukraine.
And I think it's important to name that both finding refuge or petitioning for refugee status or in migrating without authorization or outside of the inspection systems are both expressions of forced migration.
That's right.
They just the legalized of it and the paperwork and all the requirements are different, but they're both expressions of forced migration.
That's right.
For refugees, they're outside of the country, they're waiting for a long time, they're doing all the process abroad like you would if you're seeking asylum in the country, but outside the country and you're coming in already with having gone through the security process. But I reviewed applications today of people who had lived outside their home country for close to 20 years in refugee camps. The process takes so long. Can you imagine? I mean, before coming to the United States and being resettled here in Minnesota and going through that process with the local resettlement agency, getting your green card, and hopefully then later becoming U.S. citizens.
I think to me, that kind of reality is one of the ones where I know with Alight, we are starting to care about, one, documenting that journey and saying it's not just the arrival, it's how many other borders, how many other travels, and how much life happens of various different qualities in that journey. It is actually somewhere between 15 to 20 years that an individual can spend being displaced. That means someone could be born in a refugee camp. That means someone could actually have several lives, could have children, could raise in conditions that we would not want for ourselves. And so I think I hope that there's a calling for a complete review of these kinds of processes, not just for the U.S., but I think for many countries who are dealing with systems that may not be ready. And there are hopeful stories and there are strategic priorities and decisions each one can make, but the point is these are human journeys as well.
I want to take a moment to share a statistic, a number from the Pew Research Center. About 20% of Minnesota's Hispanic immigrants arrived within the last 10 years. 20% in the last 10 years. That's a big chunk of the population here, and I'm guessing that many don't see these issues all in the same way. So, Amelia, I'm just curious, what do you hear from the folks that you talk to?
So, I think we hear, like I mentioned, the basic needs and how to have wraparound services to navigate systems. Like, yes, we open the path for driver's licenses, but in our workshops, we have to explain what is a DMV. Like, why do you have to go through this testing center and then go to the driving test? And just navigating systems and providing the support for folks to understand that, for example, in Minnesota, you need to have insurance. This is not like a worldwide thing that is a requirement to own a vehicle outside of the U.S., or different requirements for driving with children or infants, for example. So the navigational needs are in high demand. And what we hear is stories about, like the other panelists mentioned, about the different borders, the different treatments depending on the different countries that they are stepping in. And anecdotes about riding on La Bestia, or the Beast, that is this very long railroad that comes from the southern border of Mexico, from Guatemala, and all the way to the southern border in the border states in the south of the United States. And we there is fear, there's uncertainty, and there's also a lot of hope because the social services, the people that are bilingual, even the radio stations or the news that they can read in their own language, that instills a sense of community that starts and commences to heal the nervous system after being in so much fight and flight, because this is not a few days worth of trouble. This can take months and months for people to save all the money, to protect their paperwork that sometimes they're carrying. We have seen so many paperwork that are crumbled and wet and dirty because they have gone through a journey. And we hear need, we see resilience, and we feel hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to take a moment to remind our listeners that if you're just joining us, you're listening to a special North Star Journey live discussion in partnership with Sahan Journal about immigration in Minnesota. And we are recording this at El Colegio High School in Minneapolis. Our panelists, I'd like to introduce them again to you. Amelia Gonzalez, who's the executive director of UNITAS Minnesota. John Brooding, a supervising litigation attorney at the Advocates for Human Rights. Jenny Stoll-Powell, the legal director at the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota. And Nazra Ismail, the U.S. Enterprise executive director of Alight. Amelia, immigration relief, only the first step to building a life in the United States, but your organization really works to continue the work of supporting Latino immigrants as they build a life here. And for example, just last year, the Minnesota state legislature passed a law that allows the undocumented Minnesotans to get the opportunity to get a driver's license. You've mentioned that. We've talked about that. What's the status of other bills that you've worked on that support Minnesota's Latino community?
Well, like I mentioned, we are in implementation design phase so that undocumented or people out of status in Minnesota that qualify due to economic criteria can apply for Minnesota Care starting on January 1st of 2025. There is also, we have other bills that we're going to drop this legislative session. One is creating a wage replacement program for those who are employed already in W-2s and meet the criteria for unemployment insurance, who have been paying for years and years and years, and who cannot ask for unemployment insurance because these resources are sort of protected through federal law, but like an additional wage replacement program that can provide folks with the access to the benefits that they have been paying for years, especially with downs of some industries, like in the construction industry, where a lot of folks rely on the unemployment insurance payments during the winter so they could get training and build capacity and actually go up the prevailing waging ladder. We are also, as I mentioned, building a training center so that folks can continue to increase the skills in the green energy and construction industry. We are reviewing some of the language for the testing because translation sometimes is not, we hear that a lot of people are having challenges with the language test, like with the actual test in Spanish. And when we read it, it is not just technical. It should be accessible regardless of your education credential. Mm-hmm. And it is not as accessible as we think. So we're reviewing and maybe thinking of moving some amendments or some adjustments this legislative session so that it's more accessible. We are also, there's other additional benefits and laws that we are moving and supporting. And the training for the green economy is a big one. This is for mixed status families. There might be children or grandchildren in the family who might not want to pursue a university or college degree. And we will invite everyone who is listening right now to explore union careers. Electricians make really good money and have benefits. Carpenters, they as a wife of a carpenter, I can tell you it's a good job, and people have so much pride on the things they build. So we have all this investment in infrastructure that we're getting through the IRA and the decarbonization and building roads and bridges, well, those are good jobs that can benefit folks in the metro area and also in rural areas with big projects like the big solar panel farms, all these energy projects that need to be built across Minnesota so that we can be resilient and face the challenges of climate change. And there's other pro-immigrant bills that are moving in this legislative session that we might not be anchoring, but that we support because they're good. Being a pro-immigrant state makes sense. It shows that Minnesotans are caring and we have shared values, but it is also good for the economy as we try to reach an equitable demographic change by 2050. We have to make sure that this change also comes with access to building generational wealth that eventually transform to having more income taxes going into the state and building better infrastructure for the people that are retiring and for the ones who are being born in the state. So we are looking at a long game, and we will continue to hear from our members and the new arrivals to hear what are the challenges and see if there is a systemic change approach that we can deploy.
And Jenny and John, I want to ask you about this. A new bill that DFL lawmakers have proposed that would make Minnesota a sanctuary state, which would prohibit state and local agencies from cooperating with federal immigration authorities to deport people. Thoughts on that, or what are you hearing from families about that?
Do you want to take that one, John?
Yeah, so the Advocates for Human Rights is a supporter of the North Star Act and some of this legislation. I haven't seen a lot of talk about it yet. I think it's kind of there hasn't been a lot of news and hasn't taken some of the next steps forward. But I think it'll ultimately be a really good thing to allow law enforcement in Minnesota to focus on keeping Minnesotans safe, not doing ICE's job for them. Our local law enforcement and public safety resources should be focused on keeping us all safe, not carrying out immigration enforcement, not separating families, not taking parents from their kids, not doing any of these things that makes Minnesotans worse off. It'll instead leave us better.
Hibah?
So I think something that always really is an interesting conversation when it comes to immigration is that oftentimes the obstacles and the challenges that we talked about today, they span decades. You know, in the case of Amelia's father, who's been stuck in the system for over 20 years, you know, what is it that we've learned in previous years or previous presidential administrations? And at the end of the day, does it really matter who's president?
No. It absolutely matters. It absolutely matters who is president. And I will tell you, like, our spiel as an organization that builds civic engagement, and we build independent political pro-immigrant power. Politicians, presidents, mayors, city councils, representatives, senators, they're not saviors. They are our slate that we pick as if we're playing a football game. We pick out our slate, and then game time is the organizing, the base building, the activism that we do so that the slate that we pick can deliver in partnership and with the values that we're bringing to the game.
Yeah.
So I'm not expecting, at least personally, I cannot speak for our organization because we have some decisions to make in terms of the federal races, which I don't think will be hard, but you know, we're process oriented, so I'm respecting the process. But I am not expecting a president to save us. None of the things that have been delivered by people and for people have been done through one savior that decides that that's the thing that they're going to move in Congress. We have to organize. We have to take responsibility. This is the community that we are building together. And if we want to build an anti-immigrant community where fascism is the law of the land and we are not able to have like the religious expression that is true to our spirit and the communities, the plural communities that our multiracial democracy deserve, then we know what's the choice. But if we are serious about our beloved and cherished global democracy project, then we know we need to work hard for it. And I can tell you that our members, our leaders at Unidos, we work hard for it with our partners. So we're going to work hard. You're going to hear from us. If you're in one of our lists, you know you're going to get a text, you know you're going to get a call, and you know you're going to be enrolled to build some of those volunteer hours to call other people, because the stakes are high. It's not just immigrants on the line. It's our democracy, our ability to resolve complex historical and generational problems. The amount of power that a president of one of the most powerful nations of the world matters. It is a life or death decision that we cannot sit back and be spectators of. We need participants. We need people staring the story of how you help build the democracy that we truly deserve in our lifetime.
You got us fired up. And that was a great question. I know some of us felt like, what's our organization's policy again about this area? But I think, I think the diversity of responses to a question like that is really important. And I think what I take from what you said is democracy is the thing that we're all getting behind. And I know as a young child coming from Somalia, I remember the hunger that I had for government once I arrived in America. After 8 years, once I grew up, I went to college and I worked for U.S. government, and then I said, well, hold on now. But I think that kind of stability and that democratic voice, what I absolutely agree with, and my colleague, is the expression of our voices is what makes this country so great and what has always maintained its strength around the world. We have nearly 40, 50 countries that are looking at election, significant impact around the world that, are all happening this year. And so while I'm not able to comment on the president or what the elections would realize in all of us, I think what's important is policy does touch everyone. Policies are important for every community, every member, every a human being. And of course, this is not to say that different communities are not vulnerable to different types of policies, but at the intersection of policy and principles is whatever you do, our goal is to have humane, just, and dignified approaches, and a whole of society and a whole of government approach to caring about every individual. I know that's Pollyannish, but I actually really believe in this. I've been in the U.S. for 32 years. I love it. And I have a hard time, complicated relationship with this country and its policies. But I choose to be here, and I choose to vote, and I choose to sing its praises when it deserves it, and I choose to speak up when I think, this is not what I remember. But I also know we can be better.
Do we have time for one more question?
Well, I guess, sure, let's ask one more question. I mean, as we think about the presidential election, I'm wondering, are you all thinking about some things that could change depending on the results of the presidential election? Are you thinking about what's really on the line? Mm-hmm. Jenny?
It's hard to say. We know that it matters who's president. The policies, the discretion that is in place changes depending on the national policies.
It's a campaign issue.
Yeah.
Right?
And we need to see changes. We need immigration reform. We need a solution for people with DACA who've been here for so long. Mm-hmm. And we have something to compare it to. Nasser talked about the refugee numbers in 2018, 2019, when they went way down. That had a big impact, and we're still recovering from that. That infrastructure and the welcoming of refugees and asylum seekers and people coming to our country seeking safety. I don't want to see us, go back to some of the things that have been in place in the past.
Here's a question that is not political. What motivates each of you to do the work that you are doing? What gets you up out of the bed in the morning, Nasra?
The belief that I have control, I have a voice, and there's a part of America that I can co-create with individuals who have come to its shore, just like my family in 1992, and that's not small. That's not small. So if I can play my part, and if I can help shape the greatest welcoming movement in the U.S., I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it.
I started my introduction to immigration law on the Texas-Mexican border over 35 years ago, and thinking about this conversation brought me back to those days when it was asylum seekers coming from Central America, and we're seeing some of that still happening. So for me, it's just been a real privilege and honor to work with my clients to help support them through the immigration system. As my spouse says, I love paperwork. I love to fill out forms, and I'm good at it.
Oh, my. Well, we're glad you get up every morning.
Those skills for good and support my clients. And that's what makes me get out of bed and keep doing this work.
John, what motivates you to work in immigration?
Yeah, I made the decision to go into immigration. I was graduating law school during the 2016 presidential election, and decided, well, I guess we need more immigration attorneys now, so that's what I'll do. I've been doing some immigration work for a long time before that, so it wasn't out of nowhere. But I became an attorney under the previous administration and spent every waking hour fighting deportations and detention. And I think despite how pessimistic we all were and how bad everything was, we actually saw a lot of victories, and a lot of the victories that we saw were where people came together, working with Immigrant Law Center, working with some people that are here in the audience today. We won stuff under the last administration, and no matter how bad things got, I know the four of us and many other people here are going to keep fighting and figure out ways to make things better. But now, my day-to-day job is working with people that are at the very beginning of their asylum process, doing intakes and talking to them and getting them placed with a volunteer attorney at the very beginning of that, and then also working with people who have just been granted asylum. So it's really getting to see both ends of it at the same time, and it's so rewarding to see that contrast and see where people are now with that huge weight off their shoulders once they've got that piece of paper that says that they can stay.
And Amelia, what is your motivation to work in an area that is so complicated, but in some ways very simple?
So I came to organizing because I wanted to go to college as an undocumented student, and I stayed organizing because I do believe in that multiracial democracy North Star that has a core element of immigration justice at the center. And I am accountable. Our members dictate our agenda. They participate. They tell me I work for these members, and I have a high bar because our members deserve the best operation that can operationalize our values in the most powerful way possible. And I also I am affected by it. Mm-hmm. I was undocumented for over 20 years. And I've been in Minnesota longer than I have ever been in any other place in the world. This affects my family. This affects my father. And I honestly made a promise. This is the first time I say this. If my daughter is listening, back in 2016, when I was pregnant with my youngest child, I made a promise to my daughter. And the promise was that family and children separation, she was going to be the last generation to see family and children separation. And that all the moms and the parents, we were going to band together and we were going to win and deliver that organizing win that we deserve. So I believe that none of us want to see those images again. None of us want to leave those moments again. And I can tell you that we can deliver that. We can make that inevitable. And it takes work. So I want all of us to come together, to work hard, because that should never be part of the news or the shows or the photographs that are deployed in in the news of our time.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you for the work you're doing.
So we have some questions from you all, and I wanted to thank you to the panelists for a really productive conversation. Immigration is very confusing, and I hope that we made it a little less confusing today. So to kind of get at some more confusion, we're gonna get through some more questions. This is a really good one. I think maybe, John, this might be a good question for you. Are there different trends happening at the U.S. and Canada border compared to the southern border?
Yeah, so I think, we are seeing changes happening at the northern border. We often forget that Minnesota is a border state, but it is. We have Border Patrol operating at the northern border of Minnesota and North Dakota. And I think, we don't have a lot of information. I think it's a community that's been very neglected, and there's kind of strange processing things that happen that means that we miss a lot of who's up there. But I think, a lot of attention came to this for us, at least, with the news that there was a family from India that froze to death crossing the northern border last year. And so we've tried to pay more attention to it. There's been more attention in Canada around this. I think the fear is that this is going to continue. The harder it becomes to seek asylum in, regular ways, the harder it becomes to seek asylum and protection at the U.S. southern border. More and more people are going to get pushed north. And unfortunately, I think it's easier to get into the country and seek asylum during winter months when the border becomes more porous with frozen lakes and other things. And it's obviously the most dangerous time to do it. So we're obviously really concerned. Thankfully, this winter has been fairly mild, thanks global warming. But that's always a fear, is that we're going to see more reports of deaths. We see people in immigration detention who have crossed the northern border, and we're seeing people crossing the northern border from a number of different countries, from Europe, Eastern Europe, Central and South America as well. So I think especially with the proposed legislation that's pending in Washington right now, I think that's going to really dramatically push more people to try to cross the northern border, and that I think it remains to be seen what the effect of that is going to be. But I think it's not necessarily a good thing.
So we have a member in the audience who works with an organization that provides services to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. They have been referring callers looking to apply to asylum who are victims of a crime and wanting to apply to a U visa. Where else could this person be referring cases, since legal organizations are so overwhelmed with caseload right now?
They can contact our office. We'll do a screening. We don't take every case. We have some guidelines on which cases we take, but we also work with partners and, try to refer cases. If it's not something that we can handle, we'll refer it elsewhere. But we handle crime victim cases, self-petitions for survivors of domestic violence. So yes, they can, and I have information at the table outside if anybody wants that.
And again, Jenny's with the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota.
Yeah, and the Advocates is a big provider of asylum. We do some services for unaccompanied children, as well as for people who have experienced trafficking in various forms. I think there's a couple of other organizations, Minnesota Legal Aid, Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services, Volunteer Lawyers Network. I think just the reality, though, is we're all unfortunately really overwhelmed, and I think, I would just encourage people to keep trying and be patient. We're doing everything that we can to try to help everyone that comes through. We're just, we need 3 times as much staff and everything as we have right now.
Yeah, we're working harder to coordinate more, and so hopefully you'll see the benefit of that work as well in the future.
So at Unidos, we also have a partnership with Volunteer Lawyers Network, and we offer different support and all kinds of legal assistance. So if you can follow us in social media, you get, we deploy when we have openings, which sometimes we're able to accommodate people with high need.
If I can maybe add, and I'm not shy to say the thing that I think is important, which is when policies come, especially the ones we may not be expecting, we really call on our brave communities and those who are blessed with resources, philanthropic supporters, donors, to really raise your hand. And along the whole journey, whether we're supporting those who are coming through safe and legal ways, those who may not have had that access, support the nonprofit organizations, because the infrastructure is also going to have to be rebuilt no matter what. So I really, on behalf of everyone, I didn't check with anyone, but I will say we cannot have systems of support at all levels be under-resourced, and then the caseloads go up, and then the surprises keep coming. And so it's up to you who you support, but please, this is a plea to everyone who's listening, help us rebuild the infrastructure so that all the policies that are coming our way, we can be there and we can support everyone however we can in a just and dignified way.
So another question we got is actually relating to what you were talking about, Nasra. But anybody can feel free to chime in. Do any of the panelists have insights on effective, reputable, local grassroots efforts that Minnesotans can participate in to support refugees?
Absolutely. I mean, for Alight, we have been appreciating the response from everyday Minnesotans here in the Twin Cities and even beyond that. Where everyday Americans can set up a small team of 5 people. Doesn't have to be a registered organization, but it's everyday Americans who can privately sponsor those who are waiting to be sponsored, who have all the paperwork that they need, and who offer this opportunity that we say at Alight, offers someone to co-create with you the life that you wish you had always had access to, and for someone who's living it to provide that kind of generosity and to be a welcomer and to be a host and to be a guide and to be a support. And so there are many organizations. I know you could look them up. We work with some. Every one of us can mention a few. I'm happy to find anyone who asked that question and give you a list. But I would say we have plenty, and there are everyday people that you can support who are raising their hands and saying, let me help, let me pick someone up at the airport. We run a sponsorship program, and you can contact us at wearealight.org, and we can't wait to find opportunities for you to continue to be generous and to support. But there are many. I can go on, but there are many. Go on.
That's part of a new national program called Welcome Corps, where private citizens can help sponsor refugees. And Alight is the organization providing that training and support for those groups coming together. So I'm using your website and providing that when people ask about the program. But we also are lucky here in Minnesota that we have resettlement agencies that have a long history of working with refugees, welcoming them, providing that initial support when they come to the United States. We partner with them. We provide immigration legal services for refugees and asylees, the parolees as well, that receive support from the federal government. So lots of opportunities to get involved and support the local refugee community.
Absolutely.
And the Advocates for Human Rights is really a volunteer-driven organization. We have staff, but we have many, many more volunteers. We use volunteers for all sorts of things, translation, so we can communicate with more clients. Attorneys, I will personally train you on how to become an asylum attorney, become a fearless immigration attorney, and help somebody navigate the asylum process and hopefully win asylum. We also do advocacy at the United Nations and other regional human rights bodies to try to affect human rights around the globe, so that maybe hopefully one day people don't necessarily become refugees or don't need to flee their country in the first place. There's a lot of other really amazing organizations in the community. I couldn't possibly name all of them, but like Conversations with Friends does a lot of support for individuals that are in immigration detention here in Minnesota. Black Immigrant Collective is an amazing organization that works with Black and African immigrants, which is a really often overlooked population nationally and also here in Minnesota. Both organizations do really incredible work. Some of the other legal services organizations also, like Volunteer Lawyers Network, Immigrant Law Center, also can make really great use of other attorneys. So attorneys, we're counting on you to help us out right now.
And like if immigration and climate change are issues that are really important for you, then come to our campaigns. We are right now in the development process of our federal advocacy campaign, and it is different than service, but it is an opportunity to build the vision of the kind of laws and reforms and a state and democracy that we want to build together. So it's a different experience. It requires leadership development and a strategy and tactic, but we are co-conspiring right now, and everybody who has an interest in immigration and climate change, we invite you to have a campaign home where you know that we are accountable to that North Star and that we can build that together.
We have time for one more question.
So the terms open borders and closed borders, we have somebody in the audience who said that these terms are not very clear to them. If the borders are open, why is it that people are dying at the border, climbing the wall, etc.? And what would change if we, quote unquote, close the border? Like, what exactly do those terms mean, and how can we kind of explain that?
Well, for an immigrant like me, the concept of open border has always existed since 1592. There is an open border in the world for the wealthy, for the European countries, and for the people that have means to migrate. There's always been a closed border for the poor, for the excluded, for the marginalized, for the people that have different abilities. And it is important that we understand that there are still people who can migrate without any problem. And it's a lot of times based on the wealth that they have, the generational wealth that they possess. So I just want to plant that seed. And I know that the folks in the legal world have other things to add.
I mean, I think it's like many other terms in immigration. It means whatever the people using them want to mean at any given point in time. It doesn't really reflect the reality. The southern border of the United States has always been kind of open, kind of closed, and it kind of depends which direction you're going, right? Like,
Kinda.
As Amelia said.
Kind of open, kind of closed?
Yeah, like as Amelia said, like so many of the problems that are happening that are driving people to seek refuge here are because of extractive capital projects that are coming from the United States and Canada, mining projects in Ecuador, which is a big part of why we're seeing so many Ecuadorians come right now. Political influence from the United States into Venezuela and Nicaragua and coups throughout Latin America. It's, the history of Latin America is the history of U.S. political and economic intervention, right? That's the reason why everybody is coming here. So the borders can't be, it can't be free trade in one direction and then closed borders in the other. Mm-hmm. But the reality is like the border has also moved, right? People got crossed by the border. Like the border with Mexico is just a line in the sand. Like it's just a fiction. But I think, people are always going to move. People move from one place to another for many different reasons, and they're going to keep doing it no matter what our border policy is. People are going to still keep trying to seek safety anywhere that they can, right? Regardless of whether we limit the number of people that can seek asylum, regardless of how difficult we make it to seek asylum, people are always going to try to find safety for themselves and for their children. And the choice that we have to make isn't between an open border or a closed border. It's how we want to respond to that situation, that reality. Do we want to allow them to seek asylum and allow the promise of human rights to go into effect within our own country? Or do we want to completely cut that off and cause people to die and cause people to be harmed throughout the world so that we can try to protect some fictional ideal here in the United States? And I think, that's really what the terms are, is what the United States looks like, what our values are, not whether X number of people get to cross or not whether, not what the law itself actually is.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. We're going to wrap things up right now. It's been such an enlightening and informative conversation. Thank you to all of our panelists tonight. We've been talking with Emilio Gonzalez, the Executive Director for Unidos Minnesota, John Bruning, a supervising litigation attorney for the Advocates for Human Rights, Jenny Stoll-Powell, the Legal Director at the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, and Nazra Ismail, the U.S. Enterprise Executive Director of Allied, and our co-moderator this evening, Hibah Ansari, the immigration reporter at Sahan Journal. And a big thank you to all of the audience members here tonight. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for being able to provide such excellent questions as well here at El Colegio High School in Minneapolis, as well as to the folks at both Sahan Journal and NPR News. I want to say thank you, and just appreciate the opportunity that we can have these wonderful civil conversations. Until next time, be well, everybody.
Take care.